one hidden notebook, 6 years of secrets, and a marriage built entirely on lies. What began as a simple search inside her husband's office quickly turned into the discovery of hidden financial records, failed investments, and evidence of manipulation she never saw coming. The man who pretended to be the smart provider was secretly depending on her income the entire time. But the deeper she digs, the darker the truth becomes.
For our wedding anniversary, my brother Daniel sent me a high-tech digital frame. He said, "So I can send you new pictures of everyone back home." My husband, Liam, despised it from day one. "It's a vulnerability." He'd lecture, "Another device listening in on us." He was always unplugging it, but I'd just plug it back in. Until that morning when I woke up and the screen was completely dark. As I was checking the plug, my phone vibrated. It was Daniel. "Elara, leave the frame. Get Sophie and leave that apartment now. I'm coming to get you." I just stared at the message. Before we dive in, thank you for watching. Let me know where you're from in the comments. It's great to know who's part of this community. And as a quick reminder, this is a fictional drama I wrote to share with you all. Any similarity to real people is a total coincidence, though the emotions are very real. Our bedroom was still and quiet when I woke up, the early city glow filtering through the blinds. I turned over and looked at the digital frame on my bedside table. The screen was black. That was strange. It was always on, a gentle slideshow of family photos that ran all night. My first guess was the power cord. I reached behind the nightstand, my fingers feeling along the wire to the socket. It was plugged in securely. I tried the power button on the back, once, then again. Nothing. The screen was completely dead. I even tried a different outlet, wondering if a circuit had tripped. Still nothing. The nightstand drawer held a velvet jewelry box and a book on minimalist design Liam gave me back when he was subtly trying to refine my taste in art for our new penthouse. But the frame stayed lifeless. I got up and saw my reflection in the full-length mirror. I looked like a stranger, someone living a life that suddenly felt wrong. My eyes went back to that dark, empty screen on the table. For 2 years, that frame was the first thing I saw when I woke up and the last thing I saw before sleep. Seeing it black felt like a violation, a tiny but deeply unsettling tear in the fabric of my life, and a wave of cold anxiety washed over me. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and walked to the door. Across the hall, my daughter Sophie's bedroom door was open just a crack. I could see the soft yellow light from her little unicorn nightlight. She was sound asleep, her breathing deep and even. She was only 6, completely clueless that something in our perfect world was starting to crack. I had to protect her. I was still looking at her when I heard Liam's footsteps in the hallway. He came into view carrying a tray with my morning coffee, moving with the easy grace of a man who owns every room he enters. On the tray was my favorite ceramic mug, from a little artisan shop we found on our honeymoon. Steam was rising from the dark brew inside. He'd made it for me every single morning since we got married. He knew I was useless without it. I always saw it as one of his small, thoughtful gestures, the kind of quiet ritual that a marriage is built on. He smiled when he saw I was awake. It was that brilliant, confident smile, the one that made me fall for him in the first place. He had this way of looking at me as if of his were greatest achievement, a look of pure adoration. "Good morning," he said, setting the tray down on the bed. "I thought you'd be sleeping in." "The frame's not working," I said, my voice empty, scanning his face for any hint of a reaction. He paused for only a fraction of a second, then walked over to my nightstand. "The frame?" he repeated, his mind clearly working behind his eyes. He picked it up, turned it over, and messed with the cord. The whole act was good, but not perfect. A person actually trying to fix something moves differently. The body always betrays the lies the mouth is telling. After a decade as an art appraiser, I know how to spot a forgery. You learn to recognize the tiny tells beneath a perfect finish, the single brushstroke that gives away the artist's true intention. And Liam Sterling was not trying to fix the frame. He was watching me, measuring how worried I was. "Looks like it's fried," he said, putting it back down. "Maybe a power surge last night. Have you called Daniel about it yet?" "It worked perfectly before I went to bed," I said. He came over and placed his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs immediately finding the tight knot of stress in my neck. He always knew exactly where to press. He remembered every small detail I'd ever shared with him. For 5 years, I mistook that intense level of attention for love. "It's just an old gadget, Elara. Daniel can send you another one. Or I can get you something more sophisticated. Something that fits the minimalist style of our home." He delivered that line with a warm, patient smile, the kind that made my affection for my brother's gift seem childish and out of place. The style of our home, that was his mantra. He was always editing my life, upgrading my choices, until my own original personality felt like a distant echo. His touch was so precise, so knowing. It was always perfectly performed. For years, I told myself that precision was just a sign of how much he cared. But standing there, his hands on my neck and the frame mysteriously broken, it felt like what it was, a method of control. "You're probably right," I said, putting on a weak smile. "It's nothing serious." I pulled away from him, making it seem like I was just reaching for my coffee mug, not recoiling from his touch. "I'll text Daniel about it later." He nodded, gesturing to the mug. "Drink that before it gets cold. I have an early call with the partners." He left the room. I stood frozen, listening to the sound of his footsteps disappear down the long hall. Then I went to my dresser and grabbed my phone. The screen showed a single missed call from Daniel. I slipped into our massive walk-in closet, pulling the door shut behind me, and called him back. He picked up on the first ring, "Elara." His voice was tense, completely missing its usual laid-back charm. It was the voice of someone giving an order. My brother, Daniel Chen, was a cybersecurity genius who protected massive tech companies from hackers and had consulted for the government. I had never ever heard even a hint of fear in his voice. Not when our father was diagnosed. Not when his own startup nearly failed. Never. But I heard it now, a slight tremor in his voice that sent a shock of pure ice right through me. "I need you to listen to me very, very carefully." My knuckles were bone white from how hard I was gripping my phone. "Daniel, what's going on? Why did the frame die?" "I killed it," he said. There was a bit of silence, and I could hear him take a slow breath, trying to steady himself. "I shut it down from my end. The frame has a security backdoor. I installed it, streams ambient audio to a secure server. It was a failsafe. Elara, I have a recording from last night. You have to hear this. Right now." The closet suddenly felt like it had no air, like the walls were closing in on me. I mean that. The dark closet, thick with the scent of cedar and Liam's designer cologne, felt like it was tilting. It's the feeling you get when you realize your entire life is built on a lie. I put my hand on the wall to steady myself, my fingers pressing into the cool paint. "Play it," I whispered, but my heart was screaming, "Please don't. Please just tell me this is a joke, that the frame just had a glitch, and this is all one giant horrible mistake." But Daniel played the recording, and the first voice I heard was Liam's. I need to try and explain what was so horribly wrong with his voice, because my brain was trying to deny what I was hearing. It was Liam's voice, the same rhythm, the same smooth tone I'd listened to for 5 years across fancy restaurants, on lazy Sunday mornings, and in the dark of our bedroom. The same voice he used to explain venture capital deals to me until I drifted off to sleep. It was definitely him. But the man behind that voice was gone. All the affection, the charm, the playful quality he used when he was trying to persuade me, it was all gone. The voice on this recording was cold and clinical, like a surgeon discussing an operation. He had turned me into a problem that needed to be solved. The dosage has to be higher this time. I'll tell her it's that new organic blend she loves from the market. She'll drink the coffee. She always drinks the coffee. My stomach lurched. I felt sick to my core. Then a second voice spoke, a voice that turned my blood to ice. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, the woman who always called me the daughter she never had, who said I was the only one who really understood her son. On the recording, her voice was like a shard of glass. Make sure it's strong enough. We can't have her putting up a fight when the lawyers arrive. And Liam, you need to get those power of attorney documents signed before she can process anything. This is our last chance. I know, Mother. Liam's voice on the recording was clipped and annoyed. The paperwork has been ready for over a month. And the girl? His mother's voice was low, like she hated saying the word. What about Sophie? She's not going anywhere. She's our leverage if this gets messy, which it won't. A short silence. By the time Elara is clear-headed enough to call for help, everything will be legally binding. My legs just buckled beneath me. I caught myself on a rack of his suits, my knuckles bone white. Hangers rattled loudly in the silence of the closet, and I clamped a hand over my mouth to choke back a scream. My eyes were stinging, but the tears wouldn't come. Not yet. Not while Liam was just in the other room with a tray, and the coffee he was planning to drug me with. I swallowed the tears until my throat ached. My chest was so tight it felt like my ribs were cracking. 4 years. For 4 years he'd pulled me close at night, telling me I was his entire world. 4 years of him whispering I love you and I will always, always protect you. For 6 weeks. He had those divorce papers waiting for 6 weeks. And he used my daughter's name like she was just a bargaining chip. In that single moment, something inside me shattered. It wasn't just anger or heartbreak. It was everything all at once, twisting into something cold and sharp. Something that knew exactly what came next. Elara. My father's voice suddenly cut through the phone call, sharp and fierce, the primal instinct of a parent trying to save his child from across the world. Listen to me. Don't take anything. Don't even pack a purse. He cannot know you suspect a thing. I need you to grab Mia and get out of that apartment right now. Robert is waiting for you on the street, 2 blocks down from your building. Dad, my voice was a broken whisper. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. Elara, please. I've only ever heard my father, Arthur Vance, say please twice. Both times, it felt like the end of the world. Now get your daughter. A knock landed on the closet door. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. 3 knocks from a husband who thought he'd already won. Then Liam's voice came through, warm and so familiar. The voice I had trusted for years. Elara, honey, your tea is getting cold. You okay in there? My heart was pounding so loudly, I thought he could hear it through the wood, through the lies of our entire marriage. My hands were shaking. My legs felt weak. The weight of our life together, a life I thought was real, was simply suffocating me. I took one long silent breath. I found that quiet place inside myself. The one I use when a priceless piece of art is about to be ruined, and a single wrong move means disaster. It's where my hands go still, and my focus becomes a laser. I went there. I'm fine, I called out, my voice even and light. Just trying to find my favorite sweater. I'll be out in a second. I ended the call with my father. I pressed my hands flat against my legs until the trembling stopped, my expression turning into a calm, empty mask. Then I opened the closet door and smiled at my husband. It was the performance of a lifetime, and it bought me exactly 3 minutes. That was all I would need. 3 minutes. I'd already timed it out in the closet, my pulse banging out the seconds. Liam would take the tea to the kitchen. He would check his phone at the island he always did and scroll through work emails, looking important. 3 minutes, my only window to stop being the woman I was and become the woman I had to be. I walked out of our bedroom, pulling a cardigan over my arms, my voice totally casual. Every single step was measured, one sound out of place, and this would all be over. I think I'm just going to pop outside for a quick walk, I said, stopping at the end of the hallway. For some air. This headache has been nagging me all day, and I think the cold will help. Liam glanced up from the kitchen island. His face instantly arranged itself into a mask of concern. It was a performance. The slight frown, the soft eyes, his posture turning towards me. I had seen him make that face 1,000 times and thought it was love. Now, with his words burned into my memory, I saw the ice-cold calculation underneath. "I'll come with you," he offered, setting his phone down. "No, it's okay." I shook my head, managing a small, tired smile. "I just need 10 minutes alone with the cold air. You know how I get. I'll be back before your tea is even cold." I walked across the living room, patting his arm on my way past him, a familiar, everyday touch. "Go on, watch some TV. You've been working all day." His eyes held mine for just a bit too long. I met his stare without flinching. My face was tired, loving, and a total blank. He finally gave a nod. "Okay, but grab a coat. It's freezing out there." "I will," I lied and walked to the door. I did not grab a coat. The instant I was out of his sight and heard the television click on, I moved. I didn't run. Running makes noise. I moved silently, the way I do in my studio around ancient, fragile things. I knew one mistake would bring it all crashing down. I eased open the door to Mia's bedroom. She was asleep on her side, clutching a little stuffed bear. Her dark hair was a halo on the pillow, her mouth slightly parted in the deep, trusting sleep of a child who knows they are safe. Her nightlight cast a warm, golden glow across her small face. In that gentle light, she looked so tiny, so oblivious to the storm brewing just one room away. Looking at her was a physical pain. My heart felt like it was being torn in two. She felt safe because she didn't know her own father's betrayal. She didn't know that when she woke up, her home would be gone. She didn't know the man who read her stories in funny voices had just called her leverage. She was completely, blissfully innocent, and in that moment, her innocence was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Come on, sweet girl," I whispered, lifting her up in a single practiced motion. She was a warm, heavy weight in my arms, limp with sleep and absolute trust. I wrapped her blanket tightly around her shoulders. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, still lost in a dream. "Mommy?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Shh." I kissed her forehead, my own eyes burning with tears. "We're going on a secret adventure." "A secret," she murmured, and her eyes drifted closed with the total faith of a 5-year-old who had never been betrayed. That trust nearly broke me right there. I carried her down the hall to the guest room balcony. Dead ivy covered the iron trellis. I already knew how cold the metal would feel. I had tested it yesterday, making sure the rungs would hold our weight. Tonight was real. The iron was cold and hard beneath my hands. It was built to last. Mia's arms wrapped around my neck as I swung one leg over the railing, feeling for the first rung with my foot. My thin slippers were useless. The metal was like a bar of ice. The night air was sharp, a bitter taste of the coming winter. I gripped the trellis, shifted Mia's weight against me, and took a deep, steadying breath. Then I started climbing down. Each movement was slow and deliberate, balancing my daughter's life with my own. Mia's head was on my shoulder, her warm breath on my neck. She didn't even stir. She trusted me, trusted my body to keep her safe, simply because I was her mother. The second my feet touched the wet grass, a sound tore from my throat. It wasn't a cry, but a single, sharp gasp as my body finally let go of the pressure. Mia's weight was a solid comfort. The grass was freezing, soaking my feet. The air smelled of rain and cold earth. And then, at the edge of the driveway, a pair of headlights flashed twice. It was Robert. I clapped a hand over my mouth, stopping the sob that tried to escape. My legs were shaking so hard I could hear my teeth chatter. I had actually done it. I took one step towards the lights, and then the master bedroom window above me lit up. I didn't look back. I just ran. This wasn't a careful escape anymore. It was raw fear as I ran barefoot across the grass, clutching Mia. I reached the BMW and Robert had the door open, his face hard, a look I hadn't seen since he was facing down lawyers in a courtroom. It was the face a man makes when he stares into hell and decides to fight back. "Get in," he said. I scrambled inside. He slammed the door and the car was already moving before I could find the seat belt. "Robert." My voice came out as a ragged whisper. Mia grumbled in my arms and I rubbed her back to soothe her. "Robert, the lights, you think he saw us?" "He saw the porch light. Come on." "Then the bedroom," Robert said, his eyes locked on the road ahead. "He'll check Mia's room first. By the time he knows for sure you rig on, we'll be on the freeway." He let out a slow, steadying breath. "Dad has a man inside the security office. Liam is not going to be able to follow you." The sob I'd held back since the closet finally broke free. It was one raw, ugly sound of pure release. I buried my face in Mia's hair, holding her so tight she whimpered. I forced my arms to loosen, forced myself to breathe. Mia settled again with the easy resilience of a sleeping child. And I just sat there in my brother's car, crying silently as the world rushed past us in the dark. 4 years, I breathed. The words tasted like ash. "Liam, for 4 solid years, I know." His voice was tight, a leash on a beast of pure rage. He brought me a warm mug of milk and honey every night. I dug my knuckles into my lips, trying to stop my chin from trembling. Every single night for 4 years, he knew just how I liked it. He remembered I hated cinnamon on weekdays because of my headaches. My voice just broke apart. It took a second to piece it back together. He was slipping tranquilizers in my drink for a month, and I drank every drop. I even thanked him for it, Liam. I told him it was the most thoughtful thing he did for me as my husband, Isabel. He said my two name, and it sounded like a fault line splitting open. He cleared his throat. "I swear to you, I will make it my personal mission to see that man never knows another second of peace." "Get in the queue," I said, and the sound of my own voice shocked me. The grief was gone. In its place was something icy, something with a razor's edge. The kind of focus that comes when your entire life has taught you that seeing the problem is only step one. How you fix it is everything. Sophie stirred in my arms. Her eyelids fluttered, a bit more alert now. She gazed up at me in the sweeping glow of the streetlights, her expression melting from drowsy confusion to the simple fact that Mom was here, which meant everything was okay. "Mommy, you have tears," she whispered, raising a tiny warm hand to my face. The sound that came out of me was one part laugh and one part the rawest pain I have ever felt. "Just a few," I told her. "But I'm fine now, my love, I promise you." "Did you get a boo-boo?" she asked. She gasped, examining my face with the serious concentration she only used for truly critical matters. "Not the kind a kiss can make better." I turned and pressed a kiss into the middle of her palm. She smelled of baby lotion and that deeply comforting scent of a warm, sleeping child. I clung to that smell like it was a life raft. "Go back to sleep. We're almost at Grandpa Arthur's house." Her eyes flew wide open with the pure, undiluted happiness that only the name Grandpa Arthur could create. With mittens, Liam confirmed from the driver's seat, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard in him before. Sophie let out a tiny, contented sigh and tucked her head against my shoulder once more. In less than a minute, her breathing settled into the deep, even rhythm of sleep. I just stared out the car window. The thick city lights were starting to give way to the darker, more urgent stretches of the open highway. Somewhere back in that city, Marcus Sterling was stepping into his daughter S' now empty bedroom. I looked at the back of my brother S' head. How many of Dad's associates are on this for us tonight? "All of them," Liam said. "Every last one. This story is only just beginning, and it says about to get intense. If you're on Isabel's side, please type a 1 in the comment section. And a warning, some of what follows has been dramatized for the sake of the story. If this is too much for you, this is your chance to stop watching. But if you're ready, let us get through this next chapter together. The massive iron gates of the Davies family estate swung shut behind us with a heavy final clang that I felt in my chest. It was the sound of a sanctuary locking itself away from the outside world. It meant you are safe here. Whatever is out there cannot touch you anymore. I let out a breath I feel like I'd been holding for a week. The main house was blazing with light, every window on the first floor a warm, welcoming beacon in the darkness. I could see my father's silhouette in the grand doorway before our car even stopped. Liam came around to get my door. I stepped out onto the gravel drive holding Sophie, who was now awake and just staring at the enormous mansion with big, sleepy eyes. To her, this wasn't a fortress. It was simply Grandpa's house, a wonderland of hidden rose gardens, and her favorite cat, Mittens. My father, Arthur Davies, was waiting for us just inside. He didn't say a word at first. He is 70, with the rigid posture of a man who built the nation's most formidable law firm from scratch. But when he saw me on his marble floor, dressed in a cheap motel bathrobe, with bare feet, clutching his granddaughter, his stern expression just shattered. He crossed the foyer in 2 long strides and enveloped us both in a crushing, protective hug. He held on with the desperate, raw strength of a father who'd been listening to his son's frantic phone calls for hours, totally unable to help his only daughter until right this second. "You're safe now," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion and cracking. My own eyes started to burn again as I buried my face in his shoulder, just holding on tight. "I'm safe, Dad." We stayed like that for a few moments. Then Arthur pulled away, cleared his throat, kissed my forehead, and became the man I'd known my whole life. The man who turns fear and hurt into pure strategy and action. "The doctor is in the library waiting for you," he said, taking Sophie from my arms like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sophie immediately clutched his collar. "Grandpa, where's Mittens?" she asked, her voice full of a child's single-minded priorities, and Arthur answered, "In the den, my dear, waiting for you," with a level of calm that I knew was costing him everything. He carried Sophie down the corridor, and I followed him. A woman in dark green scrubs was standing by the library door, her medical bag open on a table. Her ID badge read Dr. Anna Rostova. "Isabel," she said, her voice reassuringly professional. "This is just going to take a second. Your right arm, if you please." I sank onto the edge of a deep leather chair, pushing up my sleeve on pure instinct. As the needle slid in, I heard Sophie's joyful shriek of "Mittens" from down the hall, followed by a cat's deep, happy purr. That simple, normal sound of happiness made my chest clench. I bit down hard on my lip, focusing on my breathing until the ache subsided. "All finished," Dr. Rostova said, taping a small cotton ball to my arm. "We will have the results within 12 hours. A full toxicology screen." 8, if that's at all possible," I said, pleased. She looked directly at me, her expression neutral. 8 hours it is, she confirmed. The library had been turned into a command center. My father, Arthur Davies, was at his huge desk with 2 laptops open, a yellow notepad filled with his sharp, decisive handwriting, and an old, half-full mug of black coffee. He was a man who looked as though he'd decided sleep was an indulgence he couldn't afford. He looked up at me over his glasses with an expression that said he'd been preparing for this fight for years. "Isabel," he said. "I want it all," I said, my voice rock solid as I sat in the chair opposite him. His buildings, his investment accounts, his offshore corporations. Every asset Marcus Sterling believes is his. Arthur just pushed one of the laptops toward me. I pulled it closer and opened the main file. My father's forensic accounting team had been brutally effective. 5 years of Marcus's entire financial history, all organized into secure encrypted files. I began to sift through them with the cold precision of a former analyst searching for the one fatal weakness in a system, taking it apart layer by layer. It took me less than 15 minutes to find the network's core, the oracle, the predictive analytics engine his entire real estate empire was built on, the one he passed off to global investors as his own unique genius. My creation. Arthur, I said, and my voice was sharp, without a single tremor. He looked up from his notes, recognizing that a woman's tone like that meant business. The original prenuptial agreement. Schedule C, Section 3. Can we enforce that clause tonight? Arthur put his pen down. Show me what you found. I turned the laptop around so he could read the screen. It's the Aura Tower, I told him. I drew those plans. He's been claiming them as his firm's intellectual property, and tonight I am shutting him down. Arthur reviewed the project files and the prenup, his eyes moving over every line twice. He was the kind of lawyer who confirmed everything 3 times, building a case made of solid iron. I learned years ago that being patient with him paid off. He scrolled down a page, then scrolled back up. He removed his reading glasses, cleaned them with his silk handkerchief, and put them back on. The prenup, he said at last. Schedule C, Section 3. You are absolutely certain the intellectual property rights are reserved exclusively for you. I drafted that section myself, I told him. My lawyer at the time said I was being unreasonable. I said I was being prudent. There's a big difference. Arthur almost let a smile show. Almost. Tell me the exact language. I recited it from memory, like the core principles of physics or the tensile strength of concrete. Some things you just know because they are the foundation of your entire life's work. All proprietary designs, conceptual frameworks, and architectural plans created by Isabel Moreau before or during the marriage shall remain her sole and exclusive property, licensed for use by the Stern Group on a per-project basis, subject to her explicit written approval. The license for any specific design is revocable at will with immediate effect upon written notice of a material breach of contract. My father had walked into the study while I was speaking. He stood near the bookshelves with his arms crossed, and when I finished, he said, his voice deep with pride, "That's my girl." I felt a lump form in my throat and looked back at the laptop before the emotion could shatter my focus. "Arthur," I said, "how quickly can you file for the injunctions?" "They already filed," Arthur said, turning his own laptop to face me. "I wrote them up the moment you first called." He paused. "Mr. Chen, you've represented my family's gallery for 20 years. You know my standards. The documents were surgical, precise, and completely ruthless. They listed every single painting by its official registration number. They quoted our prenup line by line. It named all 5 of the multi-million-dollar collections currently built around my work as the main attraction, from the private acquisitions on the Gold Coast to the new museum wing that was based on my Urban Decay series. It ordered, with no room for argument, that all sales and exhibitions were to halt immediately, pending an investigation into intellectual property. I read it, then pulled out my phone and texted a number I hadn't touched in a year. "Marco, it's Maya. I need you. Follow the money." The response came back almost instantly. "Figured this day would come. Give me a few hours. I'll dig up the wire transfers for every dollar he siphoned from your accounts. Every forged signature on a bill of sale, every painting he registered under his gallery's name, not yours. You'll have everything, Maya." A moment passed, then another message. "I'm just sorry it took so long for somebody to finally put him in his place. He's been stealing your light since that first big gallery show." Something inside me cracked. It wasn't sadness or victory, just the clean, cold relief of being believed by someone who always knew the truth but couldn't prove it. I put my phone down on the antique desk, pressed my hands against the cool wood, and took a long, steadying breath. "He's on it," I told Mr. Chen. "Perfect. The lawyer swiveled his monitor and attached two more documents, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm including our firm's cease and desist and the executed prenup as official exhibits. This goes to Robert's gallery, the legal teams for all 5 collections, and the Chicago Arts Council. Simultaneously, he glanced up at me. Do you want to give the final filing one last look? No, I told him. I want him finished. Mr. Chen just nodded. He turned the screen my way and hovered the cursor over the submit button. Then he leaned back, offering the final move to me because he knew some battles have to be won by the one who was betrayed. I clicked the mouse. The timestamp on the monitor read 1:21 in the morning. The notice shot out into the world, hitting 5 major gallery servers, 2 city agencies, and 1 very personal inbox. In just a few hours, when the art market opened, Robert Croft's entire gallery empire would be completely paralyzed. He didn't have a clue, of course. He was out somewhere, probably glad-handing collectors at some fundraiser, or maybe screaming at his latest intern, trying to find me. He was doing all of that, totally unaware that the foundation of his lakefront penthouse was about to crumble. I gazed out the window at the Chicago skyline. My reflection was ghost in the glass, with the infinite city behind it. Enjoy the view, Robert, I thought. It's the last time you'll have it from this high up. I managed about 3 hours of sleep on the study's leather sofa, with my coat as a blanket, my phone on the floor where I'd feel the vibration. At some point, my dad David slipped it in and laid a thick wool blanket over me without a whisper. It was such a dad thing to do, silent, protective, and deep, that when I woke and saw it, my eyes stung for a second before I blinked it away. It was 7:48 in the morning. My phone had 92 notifications. I sat up, opened the first one, and saw what my husband Robert Croft had posted online at 6 a.m. While I was sleeping here, and our daughter Sophie was safe in my old bedroom just down the hall. The photo was from last year's Art Institute Gala. We were on the grand staircase of the museum. Robert in a perfect custom suit, his hand possessively on the small of my back, the two of us sharing a private smile. I remembered that exact moment. A critic had just praised my latest piece, and Robert had whispered something funny in my ear. It was a real laugh, a truly genuine moment, which made it the perfect weapon for his lie. The caption read, "Last night, my pregnant wife Maya had a severe mental health episode and fled our home. She won't answer her phone. She's been battling anxiety, and I am terrified for her and for the safety of our unborn child. Maya, my love, if you see this, please know how much I adore you. Please come home. The apartment feels so empty without you." The morning news anchor looked on with such pity. The comments online were a tidal wave of support. What an amazing, devoted husband. We're all praying she's found safe. This is just devastating. I was watching it all on a tablet when my brother Marco came in with coffee. He saw my expression, took the device, watched the clip, and let out a quiet stream of swears that made our dog, Gus, lift his head. "Marco," I whispered, "Sophie is right in the next room. I know where Sophie is." Marco's jaw was clenched, his knuckles pale. He gave the tablet back. He used the photo from our Paris trip, Maya, the one from your anniversary. "He's using that picture to make you look crazy." "I know, Marco. You can't seriously let him do this." He stopped himself, running a hand through his dark hair. "Please tell me you have a way to fight back." "I am going to fight," I told him, "but I'm not playing his game." Sophie's quiet footsteps in the hall were the only sound before she was there, dressed in a unicorn pajama set, her hair a messy crown. Gus padded over to lean his head on her knee. She looked between me and Marco with that sixth sense all little kids have for adult tension. "Why is Uncle Marco's face all mad?" she asked. "Uncle Marco does not have a mad face," Marco said, forcing a grin that never touched his eyes. "He was just thinking very hard about video games." "Come here, you little monster." He scooped her up and she laughed, holding onto his collar. I watched them, my heart a painful mix of love for my family and pure rage. It was almost too much to hold inside. "Mommy," Sophie said, now comfortable on Marco's hip. "I saw Daddy on Grandpa's TV show." He looked sad. Why was Daddy on the TV? I set down my mug, walked over, and held Sophie's little face in my hands. I put every ounce of my strength into that single look. Her eyes were the same shade of green as Robert's, a constant, sharp reminder, and my love for her was a fire that could destroy everything in its path. "Daddy is handling some very complicated adult problems," I said softly. "But you don't need to worry about that. Your only job right now is to find Grandpa David and talk him into making his famous blueberry pancakes." Her eyes went wide. "With extra syrup? Go on. You're the only one he can say no to." She instantly wiggled to get down. Marco put her on her feet, and she and Gus bolted down the hall, a little storm of energy that both broke my heart and pieced it back together. I turned back to Marco. "He wants this to be public. A nasty media circus." I shook my head. "He would win that fight. It turns this into gossip, not facts." I grabbed my phone. "I need you to find the doctor who signed this psychiatric evaluation he's waving around. Find out who's paying him." Marco returned to the study later that day, his laptop open, and his expression said it all. His face was a mask, his eyes had that cold focus he gets when he's deep in code, chasing a digital ghost. "Found him," he said, pushing the tablet across the desk. "Dr. Alan Finch. Runs a private wellness clinic for the super rich. Very discreet. He was paid to file a psychiatric evaluation on you 3 weeks ago. He tapped the screen. It claims you had 2 sessions, March 10th and March 22nd. The dates just hung in the air. An icy feeling washed over me. "March 10th, I said. "I was in New York for my client's gallery opening. My picture is plastered all over the art scene websites. I was there all weekend long." "I know," Marco said, his voice quiet. "I saw the pictures. March 22nd. My voice was strained. You and I were at Mom's birthday dinner, at that little Italian restaurant she adores. We were there for hours listening to her stories, and you kept trying to steal my dessert." Marco gave a short, harsh laugh. "It was a good tiramisu, Maya, I know." I leaned against the desk, the cool glass a shock against my hands. I was not in some downtown clinic on March 22nd. I was watching you argue over cake. I pulled the tablet closer and opened the full psychiatric report. So this Dr. Finch either completely fabricated this, or someone fed him lies. I started reading the clinical summary, and my blood ran cold. It listed everything in detached medical terms: paranoia, emotional instability, and poor judgment regarding career choices. My hands felt numb. It wasn't just shock. It was a deep, bone-chilling cold. I recognized every symptom on that list. I'd been feeling so foggy for weeks, just blaming it on stress and gallery deadlines. "Marco," I whispered, my voice thin, "how is this possible?" He was already typing again, his face locked in focus. Then he stopped cold. "Oh no." He turned his laptop towards me. "A shell corporation owned by my husband, Robert. It was making monthly payments to a specialty pharmacy for a customized prescription. In my name." My hands flew to my mouth, the tablet nearly slipping from my grip. I couldn't get any air. My lungs felt like they were shrinking. It was a draft, a press release, detailing my breakdown before it had even happened. Julian. He was scripting my collapse. It was a strategy for his company's merger. I couldn't even think the words. Leo was suddenly there, his hands on my arms, keeping me from falling. The way you steady someone in total shock. "Chloe, look at me. Breathe." I looked up, and my brother's face was a mask of cold fury I'd never witnessed. His expression was granite. I had never seen my brother look so threatening. He planned it, I choked out, the words like glass. He scripted this like a product launch. He found the poison. He found the doctor to create a fake diagnosis. And every single night, he'd come home, kiss me, and ask if the stress of the gallery was getting to me. A sob tore from my throat. He asked if I needed to step back, Leo. every single night. My brother pulled me into a hug and just held on while I fell apart. What else was there to say? I let myself break for about 60 seconds, just a raw, furious cry into his shoulder. Then I pulled back, wiped my face. I grabbed my phone. Leo, I need you to file everything, I said. I want his assets frozen. I want his company board notified before the market opens tomorrow. Just then, Leo's phone pinged. It's the investigator, he said, his eyes scanning the screen. You have to see this. I was already grabbing my purse as he read it aloud. He found something at the penthouse. Meet me at the office now, he said. I was out the door before he finished the sentence. Leo's office felt like a vacuum. Or maybe it was me, just filled with cold, sharp rage. He stood by the conference table, a single file placed squarely in the middle. Our father was there too. He was standing by the window, his arms folded, his face looking 10 years older. Just show me, I said, my voice is empty of everything but resolve. Leo gave me a look of quiet understanding, the look of a brother who knows that only the truth can cauterize a wound this deep. The lab report shows persistent exposure to a sophisticated nerve agent, Dr. Evans explained. We tested a hair sample. It shows a methodical low-dose delivery over the last 3 weeks. 21 days. The number echoed in my head as my memory filled in the blanks. 3 weeks ago, I collapsed during a gallery opening, blaming it on low blood sugar. An intern had to drive me home. 3 weeks ago, I completely botched a major auction bid, sending a rambling, confused email I don't even recall writing. I told myself the vertigo and the brain fog were just pregnancy symptoms. I needed more sleep. 21 days, I whispered. My voice was eerily calm. That calm felt like the most dangerous thing in the office. The blood work confirms exposure within the last 48 hours, Dr. Evans continued, which means he kept going. He was still drugging you the night you left. The smoothie, that special prenatal blend he insisted on making me every night, with that kind, worried smile. The smoothie I left untouched on the counter as I slipped out the back door, carrying my daughter in my arms. Across the room, my father made a strangled noise. It was quiet and sharp, the sound of a man taking a blow he never imagined possible. He faced the window, one hand flat against the pane, his shoulders rigid. I knew he was replaying the last few weeks in his head, just like I was. All the Sunday brunches, the times he'd asked how I was, and I just said I was tired. Dad, I started to say. Just a minute, Chloe. He choked out, his voice raw. Just give me a minute. I let him have it. I turned back to Dr. Evans. Olivia, I said. She used to have sips of that smoothie with me. My heart started pounding against my throat. She loved the taste. She always begged for a sip. She needs to be tested, doctor, now. Dr. Evans was already standing. I took a sample from her last night as a precaution, she said. I rushed the test the second you mentioned the daily smoothie. The lab sent her results over with yours. She met my eyes. Olivia's tests are clean, Chloe. She's completely clear. The noise that tore out of my throat wasn't a cry. It was something more animal. I grabbed a chair to stay upright, doubled over, as pure relief shattered me. My entire body started to tremble. My knees buckled. The wave of relief was so intense it felt like agony. She's okay, I sobbed. She's okay. She is perfectly fine, Dr. Evans confirmed, her voice soft. My father came over and put a hand on my back, a steady, solid presence. I just knelt there, breathing, until the shaking finally stopped, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty. I stood up, wiped my face. I looked at Leo. I want this entire toxicology report certified and notarized, I told him, and I want the petition amended. I took a deep, painful breath. Julian Vance wasn't just conspiring to harm me. He was actively poisoning me and his unborn child for weeks. This isn't just domestic abuse. It's not just assault. I grabbed the file from the table. You add attempted murder for me and for my child, Leo, because that is what happened here. Leo began writing instantly, his pen flying across the legal pad. One more thing, he said without looking up. The court granted the emergency protection order. He can't get within 500 yards of you or Olivia. He paused. And Chloe, his two biggest investors, pulled out of the merger this morning. The news is starting to leak. I just stared at the report. 3 weeks. A period of my life that would always be a wound. Good, I said. Ruin him. I had personally designed the integrated smart home system for our San Francisco penthouse long before Julian and I were married. It was a professional habit for an architect obsessed with clean lines and hidden functions thinking about security. The main hub was a custom piece I designed for the living room, a sculpture of polished steel that looked like decor. It was a system Julian enjoyed, but never looked at closely enough to find the pinhole camera I'd built into its base. I opened my laptop and connected to the private network. I hadn't checked the feed since the night I fled. I couldn't bear to see that place as just a crime scene, but today I could. The connection took a moment, then the living room came into sharp focus. Isabella was on my sofa. She was settled into my favorite spot, feet tucked under her as if she owned the place. She wore a tailored blazer, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She was sipping from a delicate porcelain cup, a cup from the antique tea set my grandmother had given me on my wedding day. My tea set. She was wrapped in the antique quilt I kept on that couch, the one that was my mother's. My breath caught in my throat. Julian walked in from our bedroom. He was wearing that old university hoodie, the one with the frayed cuffs he refused to throw away. He sat next to Isabella. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder with the familiar ease that made me sick. In my home, while I was supposed to be falling apart. She's gone completely quiet, Julian said, massaging his forehead. No threats, no lawyers calling. Nothing. That isn't good, that's bad, Isabella replied. She set her cup down on my antique coffee table no coaster, leaving a damp ring on the wood. A hot wave of fury pulsed behind my eyes. Of all the horrible things he had done, that tiny mark of disrespect felt incredibly intimate. Silence means she's plotting, Isabella continued. Who does she have? Her brother, the lawyer, her father's entire network. Julian's voice was tight with anxiety, and she has her father's money. Isabella sat straight up at that. What about her brother? Is he any good? Julian? He's one of the best prosecutors in the state, she snapped, her tone turning sharp. This is very bad. He doesn't just file for divorce. He builds criminal cases. Julian buried his face in his hands. I know. Then we have to get in front of this, she insisted. We have to shape the narrative. We leak it to the press. Find a former employee, a rival gallery owner, anyone who will say she's always been erratic, that she's been cracking under the pressure for months. She grabbed his hand, her voice urgent and low. You have to frame her as unstable before she has the chance to show anyone a single piece of evidence. And what if she has evidence? Julian's voice was thin, and a shiver went through me. It wasn't the voice of a guilty man, it was the voice of a gambler trying to count the cards. Isabella just laughed. What could she have? She ran out of here with nothing but her purse. She has her family and a bruised ego, that's all. She lifted her wine glass and took a long, slow sip. There's nothing she can throw at us that we can't spin our way. My hand trembled as my finger moved across the laptop's trackpad. But it wasn't from grief. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was the cold clarity you get when someone underestimates you so terribly it's almost a gift. She didn't know about the private detective. She had no idea about the offshore accounts. She didn't know about Adam Sterling or his meetings with the state attorney general. And she certainly didn't know every single word she was saying was being recorded by a hidden camera and streamed right here to my brother's office. She saw me as a victim. She had no idea I was the one laying the trap. I clicked the small record button and saw the red dot blink on screen. Then I turned to my brother Owen, who stood right behind me, his eyes glued to the monitor. He looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Owen, I said, my voice even and clear. I need you to find the best art forger on the West Coast. I need someone who can copy 3 specific impressionist sketches in the next 48 hours, so perfectly that only a chemical test could spot the difference. Owen just stared. He looked from the live feed back to me. Chloe had just knocked my grandmother's porcelain bird off the table and onto the hardwood floor. A quiet, dark fury settled on his face. I'll have someone for you in an hour, he said. The forger Owen found had a quiet studio near Sausalito. A man named Mr. Alistair, who had spent 30 years creating museum-quality copies for private collectors and movie studios. When Owen showed me his portfolio, I saw a replica of a Monet study so perfect it gave me chills. The brushwork was precise. The way he artificially aged the canvas showed a mastery that was truly stunning. Tell him I need 3 pieces done by Friday, I said. I'll send over the high-resolution images tonight. The copies have to feel old, not just look old. They must be authentic. I hung up the phone. While Julian was panicking, I drove to our family estate and went into the art vault, the climate-controlled room that held my father's private collection. 50 paintings collected over a lifetime by a man who loved art more than anything. I stood there in the silent, cool air, and the pain I felt was deeper than the fresh wound from the last few days. It was a quiet, familiar sadness. I'm so sorry, Dad, I whispered into the empty room. I promise I will protect everything you built. Then I pulled out my laptop. Julian never had access to my work email, but my personal one, he insisted we share a calendar years ago, something I once thought was romantic. I wrote a message to our family's art advisor. I attached a file with images of the 3 most valuable sketches. Then I typed my message, thinking of getting a new appraisal for Dad's collection. Some of these could be worth millions by now. I put the advisor's name in the recipient field and my own in the BCC line. I clicked send. Then I shut the laptop, fighting the urge to check if Julian had seen it, because that would make it feel too real using my father's memory as bait in a trap for the man trying to ruin me. Owen walked in, phone in hand. He had that look, the one that meant our plan was working even better than we dared to hope. That new skyscraper project just lost its main investor, he said. And Amelia, the quarterly reports are out. 2 more of his biggest partners dropped out this morning. Atlas Holdings and Pacific Crest Group. He showed me the stock price on his phone. Those 3 investors were nearly 70% of his available cash. I just stared at the numbers. He'll be desperate by tonight, I said. He's already there, Owen replied, switching to the live feed from my house. The living room looked dim in the late afternoon. Julian was pacing back and forth, something I'd never seen him do. He was always so controlled, so calm. Calm was his power. Pacing was panic. Chloe was on the couch, watching him with an intensity that meant she was finally realizing how much trouble they were in. 3 investors in one day, Julian was saying, his voice strained. This isn't just a string of bad luck. Someone is actively moving against me. It's Amelia, Chloe said, her voice flat. It has to be her. She doesn't have those kinds of business connections. But his voice cracked on the word connections, and I knew he didn't believe his own words. Deep down, he always knew I wasn't just some rich man's wife. He knew what my family could do. His phone chimed on the coffee table. He snatched it. He read the screen, and I saw his face change through 3 separate emotions in less than 5 seconds. Confusion, then dawning realization, and finally a look I recognized instantly, pure, raw greed. Amelia just emailed our art advisor, he said slowly. Chloe got up to look over his shoulder. Her eyes went wide. A full appraisal of the entire collection? She looked back at him. How much money are we actually talking about? Her father's sketches, Julian said quietly, almost to himself. The last time they were appraised, the big 3 were valued at just under 20 million. The greed on his face was no longer just a flicker, it was a bonfire. Chloe's hand clutched his arm. Julian, she whispered, $20 million would solve everything. The bad loans, the investors, all of it. We could just disappear. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he looked back at his phone. I need to find out where she keeps the official ownership documents. I watched it all happen from Owen's office, my hands folded calmly on the desk, my breathing slow and steady. The bait was in the water, the hook was set. I felt the exact moment it sank in. Owen, I said, call the estate manager. Tell him to get the fake ownership documents ready by morning. The forger delivered the 3 fake sketches on Friday, wrapped in archival paper and packed in climate-controlled cases. His caution told me he knew the value of his cargo, even if he didn't know the real plan. I met the courier at the service gate myself. When I opened the first case, the drawing inside made me gasp. It was my father's favorite, a charcoal sketch by Degas. The paper was aged flawlessly. The glass in the frame had that subtle, nearly invisible wave of old manufacturing. The copy was so perfect my professional instincts kicked in, and I started hunting for the tiny flaws, the little signs that separate the real from the fake. It took me a full minute to find one. This is incredible work, I said. The forger, Mr. Alistair, was a small man with paint on his fingers and the calm air of someone who didn't need compliments. The signature was the hardest part, he said. Getting the pressure of the charcoal just right took all day Thursday, but I believe they'll pass any inspection. They'll pass, I said. Thank you. After he left, I carried the fakes to a secondary storage room and opened my own case. Inside were the trackers, each the size of a grain of rice, hidden in a tiny device made to look like an archival tag. I had designed the system in graduate school to help prevent the theft of rare artifacts. The tags use a mix of GPS and motion sensors to know exactly when an object is moved. Once activated, they send their precise location and an asset number, second by second. With the same care I would use on the real artwork, I attached each tag to the back of a frame, concealed beneath a fake inventory sticker. My breathing was steady, my hands perfectly still. David appeared in the study doorway just as I sealed the 4th tracking device. He watched me for a moment, his version of intense concentration. He finally spoke. Your father actually sketched out the first version of this system. Did you know that? I know, I said without looking up. You showed me his notebooks when I was 16. He would have been proud of this, David said softly. His voice was a mix of respect and sadness, and I just clenched my jaw and kept working. Yesterday, I drove to the SFPD to meet Detective Harding in the Major Crimes Unit. He was in his late 40s, sharp, with the weary eyes of a man who'd seen too much. I placed the Aegis tracker and the file on Ethan's financial fraud on his desk, and he scanned it all without a word. Then he met my gaze. So you're telling me that you plan to be the star witness, he said. I am telling you I am the evidence, I countered. I just need a warrant signed and your unit ready to move. These trackers give you a live location, a suspect, and a felony in progress. All you have to do is show up. He studied me, debating if I was a genius or just dangerously reckless. Then he simply said, give me the tracker IDs. I pushed the list of serial numbers across his desk and he started typing. The forged inventory list our contact made showed the correct pieces and their values, but it pointed to a decoy locker on a lower, unused floor. The actual fakes were in a secure vault under my name, and the real collection, already stashed in a bank downtown, safe until this whole nightmare was over. Ethan showed up at the storage facility on Thursday morning, just after 10. The manager called me the moment he read the name. He says he's acting on your behalf, he whispered. I said I needed your direct approval, but gave him the public inventory list. He was there for 10 minutes. He took pictures of every single page. Perfect, I replied. Did he seem confident? A short pause. He looked like a man who figured all his money problems were about to disappear. I thanked my contact and hung up. For the next 36 hours, Alex and I were glued to the monitors. We watched the feeds in shifts, 2 hours on, 2 off, like a bedside vigil. Then, Friday at 8:15 in the morning, a camera caught a black cargo van entering the rear loading bay. Alex was on watch. He knocked twice on the study door. Our signal. I was already on my feet. On the monitor, a man in a dark hoodie stepped out, carrying a large, heavy-duty case. He moved fast, without a hint of hesitation. He walked like someone who had practiced this exact move 100 times. At the back service door, he punched a code into the lock. My birthday. A number he'd taken from me years ago, promising it would be his special password, too. The light flashed green. "Detective Harding," I said into my phone. "He's in." He was inside for exactly 6 minutes and 41 seconds. I know because I counted them all. The cameras showed him moving through the lower halls with the cold efficiency of a person who had memorized the floor plans. Which he had. For 3 days, he'd pored over that fake shipping manifest, planning a route from the fire escape to avoid the lobby entirely. He'd really prepared. It's funny, for a man who couldn't assemble a single piece of IKEA furniture in our 5 years together, Dominic Pierce was suddenly a genius for detail when millions were on the table. I watched him on the monitor as he picked the locks on 3 separate display cases, his tools looking brand new. He slid each antique document into a padded sleeve from his bag. He moved fast, but with a careful reverence he never had for history itself. The irony hit me like a ton of bricks. He handled my father's fake collection with more respect than he ever showed my father's actual daughter. 6 minutes, 41 seconds. That was all. He sealed the case, swung it over his shoulder, and ducked out the fire escape into the van. "He's moving," Liam said from the window where we had our setup. His voice was completely flat, his professional tone he used to block out emotion. "He's heading south toward Lakeshore Drive." My phone was already in my hand. "Agent Bell, he's mobile. Black van, south on Wacker." Her voice came back, calm and steady. "We see him. We've had a visual this whole time. We're letting the deal go down. We need to get the exchange on camera," she explained. "Understood," I replied. "The trackers will ping the moment the sale happens." I hung up and threw the GPS feed on my main monitor. And there they were, 5 bright green dots, moving information across the city. I've stared at screens like this for over a decade. But this system, AG Sentinel, I built it myself, just for this. The feeling was odd. Not victory, not yet. It was that crushing weight right before a dam bursts. Liam pulled up the buyer's camera feed. The buyer's warehouse near the old stockyards was a classic grey market spot, not strictly illegal, but way off the grid for official collectors. Mikhail Petrov ran the place. I knew his name. In my world, you know who moves expensive things with shaky provenances. Our video feed was crystal clear because I designed their security network 4 years ago. And the funny thing is, they never changed the default master password I put in. Mikhail Petrov was already inside, waiting when Dominic arrived. Petrov was a heavy man in his 60s who looked at everything like he was calculating its auction price. He watched Dominic put the case on a felt table, looking like a man who charged by the minute. "Let's see it," he grunted. Dominic opened the case, revealing the first antique bond. Mikhail took out a loupe, leaning in to check the watermark. His face was a stone wall, but his head tilted slightly, a prose tell I knew. 2.5, Mikhail said. "For the lot. These are worth 4 million, Dominic argued. His voice was tight, but he held it together. "I need 3.2. Mikhail stood. "No, you need a buyer who stays quiet. That's what you're paying for. 2.5. Final." I watched Dominic's jaw tighten on the monitor from miles away. A sharp, cold feeling washed over me. Not sadness, not anger. Just the clean, mechanical certainty of a trap snapping shut. 2.5. Dominic choked out. They shook. On my laptop, 5 green dots flashed to a burning, angry red. An alert box popped onto the screen. Aegis Sentinel Priority Alert. Illicit transfer confirmed. Location 1450 North Kingsbury, Chicago. Suspect identity confirmed. Registered owner Clara Elizabeth Vance. Notification sent to the FBI Art Crime Unit and Chicago PD Financial Crimes. Case ID CPD FC 2051019. My phone buzzed before the alert box vanished. Agent Bell got right to it. We are moving in now. I could hear the raid team yelling behind her, a wave of controlled chaos coming through the phone. Behind me, Liam finally let out a long, shaky breath. Clara, he said, his voice raw with feeling he'd held in for months since the night I ran out of our house in my pajamas. It's done. He's finished. I just stared at the 5 red dots on the map. Each one was something my father had treasured. Every single one was a silent alarm, broadcasting Dominic Pierce's exact position to the feds. My entire system was built to protect the things I loved. Yes, I whispered, he is. The all clear came in at 4:46 p.m. Liam went to get coffee and came back with 2 mugs, his phone, and a different look on his face. Not shock. It was the face of a marathon runner who finally crosses the finish line and lets himself collapse. They have him, he said. Dominic and Mikhail Petrov. Both are in custody. He said they'd secured all 5 documents and had already frozen the wire transfer. He put a mug in front of me with such care, as if it was the only thing he could focus on. It's over, Clara. I looked at my hands. I always thought this moment would feel like a tidal wave of relief, that first gasps of air after being held underwater. But it was quieter than that, heavier, like putting down a weight you carried for so long your body has twisted around it, and now you have to relearn how to stand straight. What about Jessica? I asked. She wasn't there, Liam said, but Bell confirmed they have Dominic's phone. Encrypted texts between them go back more than a year. He sat across from me. They're bringing her in tonight. Right then, my father came into the study. He had that quiet way of someone who was done pretending they weren't listening from the hallway. He just looked at me for a long time, his eyes shining. He walked over and took my face in his big, gentle hands, just like when I was a kid, and kissed my forehead. It's finally done, he whispered, his voice breaking. Not quite, I replied, but I let myself lean into his hands for just 3 seconds. I needed it. I'd earned it. 40 minutes later, our lawyer, Ben Hayes, arrived. He was holding a thick manila folder that was practically splitting its rubber band. Before we file, I need to walk you through this. It's a lot. Go on, I told our lawyer, Ben. He opened the folder. Between January last year and this August, Pierce Financial made 23 separate wire transfers. Each was between $50,000 and $110,000. The total is $1.5 million. The LLC has no website, no filings, nothing. It existed only to receive this money. He set the papers down, looking at me over his glasses. $1.5 million, Clara. Funneled from company profits and paid to his mistress. From the company running on the trading algorithm you built. The money from my own system was sent by my husband straight to her through a loophole he made just for them. My chest seized with a feeling that wasn't grief, or even just pure rage. It was the awful clarity of seeing the betrayal's true depth, like restoring a masterpiece only to realize it's a forgery. Where did the money go? I asked. Ben flipped a page. Mostly real estate. A 4,000 square foot penthouse in the Gold Coast. 1.2 million. All cash. The title was held by both Dominic Pierce and Jessica Reynolds. Ben paused. The deed was filed this March. March. 8 months ago, while I worked 16-hour days, perfecting code for the launch. I'd call him every night, and he'd say how proud he was, that dinner was waiting. While I was building our future, he was building a whole other life. A sound tore from my throat, not a sob, not a gasp, just a hollow crack. The sound of a foundation giving way. My lawyer, Ethan, reached out and squeezed my hand hard. The pain was a grounding shock. How much more are we looking at? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Corporate embezzlement, Ethan said, counting on his fingers. Wire fraud. Money laundering through the shell company he set up. And that's before we even touch the personal damages. The DA is exploring conspiracy charges, Sarah. This is way past a messy divorce now. This is felony fraud. Good, I said. File it. I want every single thing submitted, every bank's statement, every single text, the private investigator's photos, every medical document we have. I want Liam's entire sham empire on the district attorney's desk first thing Monday morning. It's already being couriered over, Ethan promised me. My phone started buzzing on the table. I saw the name, Eleanor Vance. I let it ring. 3 times, 4, 5. Her name just glowed there, a persistent ghost. The woman who called me her daughter at every tech gala for the last 4 years. The woman who arranged his entire life, right down to his socks. I stared at her name on the screen and felt absolutely nothing at all. The ringing finally died. I flipped my phone over, screen down. What time is the DA's office open tomorrow? I asked. 9 a.m., Ethan answered. Then I want that file sitting on his desk by 8:55, I told him. I don't want a single page out of place. The main gate buzzed at 10:20 the next morning. I was in the sunroom with a lukewarm tea, going over the asset reports with Ethan when our head of security, a calm ex-detective named Garrett, showed up at the door. Mrs. Vance is at the gate, he said. She's on foot. She doesn't have a car. She's just been standing on the sidewalk for the past 20 minutes. I looked up from the legal documents. Ethan just arched an eyebrow. Is she by herself? I asked. Yes, Mom. I thought about it for maybe a full second. Then I said, let her in. Put her in the formal living room. And Garrett, just give me a minute before you bring her inside. He gave a single nod and was gone. I slipped my hand into my pocket, quietly started the voice recorder on my phone, and put it back, making sure the microphone was clear. Ethan saw the move. The edge of his mouth twitched up, not quite a smile, but it looked like approval. I'll be in the study if you need anything, he said, grabbing his briefcase. Stay close, I replied. The woman who walked into that living room was not the Eleanor Vance I'd known for 4 years. That Eleanor's was perfect, always in a tailored power suit, a woman who controlled boardrooms with her sharp wit and even sharper criticisms. This woman looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were puffy and red. Her hair was a tangled mess, and her expensive cashmere coat was buttoned wrong, making it hang unevenly. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip them together just to hold them steady. She saw me standing by the fireplace, and her entire face seemed to crumble. Sarah, she said, her voice small and shaky. Please, I know I have no right to be here, I truly don't, but I didn't know where else to go. Sit down, Eleanor, I said. I used her first name deliberately, destroying the formal Mrs. Vance that had always been our boundary. I needed her to understand that power dynamic was gone forever. There's a bottle of water on the table. She sat down but didn't touch it. She just twisted her hands in her lap, her eyes swollen and begging. The look of someone who's seen something terrible and can't pretend they didn't. He's my only child, she whispered. I know what he's done. I know everything now. The other girl, the fake art, the money, all of it. And I know you have every single reason to want to destroy him. Her voice cracked, and she bit her lip, struggling for control. But I am begging you, as one woman to another, as a mother to a woman who is about to become one. You know what it feels like to love a child so much that you can't see anything else. I am asking you, please, for mercy. Tell me what you knew, I said back. She flinched. Eleanor, I repeated, my voice flat, my expression blank. You drove all the way to my home. You stood at the end of my driveway for 20 minutes. If you are here to ask me for something, you are going to give me the truth first. All of it. What did you know, and when? Her eyes squeezed shut. When they opened again, the act was gone. All I saw was a broken, humiliated woman who suddenly looked 10 years older. He told me the startup was failing last summer. She started. I knew he was drowning in debt. I knew about the girl, Jessica. I actually encouraged him because Jessica was easy. She didn't have your family's name or your connections. I thought Liam needed someone who would just look up to him more than you did. She paused, and the shame on her face was raw and real. That was wrong of me. I see that now. It was a horrible, monstrous thing to do. Go on, I said. He told me his plan in November. Her voice dropped. Not all the details. Just that he was going to make you take a rest, that you were under too much stress, that you needed to be somewhere quiet to recover. He told me he found a doctor who would sign the papers. She stared at her own hands. I asked him if the wellness center was nice. I asked if it was a high-end facility, and he swore to me that it was. And I believed it all because it was easier that way. The tears were coming now, but they were silent, just slipping down her cheeks without any of the drama of a performance. This was real. This was a woman finally admitting her own lies to herself, seeing the ugly truth for what it was. He mentioned the art forger once, she said, and that was the sentence that sealed her fate. He said he had to get the fakes just right, that the swap had to be gradual so no one would notice. I told him to be careful. I told him not to be reckless. Her voice was barely a whisper. I thought he was just selling a painting to get out of debt. I didn't let myself see what he was really. She couldn't even say it. I didn't let myself realize. 8 little words that explained the giant canyon between suspecting something and actually knowing it. Eleanor, I said, speaking very clearly, I need you to listen. What you just said that you knew about an art forger, that you told him to be careful, that you knew he planned on having me committed, that is not just looking the other way. That makes you a material witness and a possible accessory to fraud. I watched the color drained completely from her face. You're going to need a lawyer, not the family attorney, someone new, someone who represents only you, not my father's company. You should probably call one today. She just looked at me, her mouth hanging open but no words coming out. Are you saying I'm going to be arrested? I'm telling you to hire a lawyer, I said again, now. She looked like the floor beneath her feet had just dissolved into smoke. She sat there, completely frozen, for at least a full minute. Then she started to weep again, but this time it was different, a quiet, hopeless sound, the noise a person makes when they finally see there's no way out of the disaster they helped build. My phone buzzed. Sarah, it's Ethan, he said when I stepped into the hall. I just got a call from Liam's attorneys. He wants to see you before his deposition tomorrow. He is requesting a face-to-face meeting. I glanced back through the door at Eleanor Vance, who was sobbing into her hands, completely broken. I turned my focus back to my phone. Set it up, I said. Official channels only. I want both of our legal teams present. And a certified court reporter typing up every single word. And Ethan? I want the final art authenticator's report in my hand before I go anywhere near that office. The law firm's conference room felt like a refrigerator. The walls were a bland, soul-crushing beige, made to make you feel absolutely nothing. A massive dark wood table seemed to absorb all the light in the room. The chairs were black leather, and mine made a sighing noise when I sat. Ethan was to my right. Liam's lawyer, a man named Reed who already looked exhausted, sat on the other side. The distance between us felt enormous. The door at the end of the long room opened, and 2 paralegals walked Liam in. He'd lost a lot of weight. His face was thin, his cheekbones were like blades, and he had a few days of dark stubble, the kind that signals you've stopped caring. He was wearing an expensive suit that now hung on his body like a coat on a hanger. He looked nothing like the man who'd made me breakfast just last week, but he also looked exactly the same because now I was finally seeing the person who was always hiding underneath. Eleanor Vance was already there, sitting in a chair against the wall. It was clearly Reed's idea. a weak attempt to show a unified family. She sat perfectly rigid, hands balled up in her lap, her eyes glued to the table. She never once looked at me. Liam sat down. He just stared at me for what felt like forever. His eyes were bloodshot, the look of a man who's been awake for days, or crying, or both. He laid his hands flat on the cold, polished wood and took a huge, dramatic breath, like an actor about to deliver a monologue. "Sarah," he began, "I know you don't want to hear anything from me, but I have to say this. I need you to know that I see what I've done, and I am sorrier than I have ever been about anything in my life." "Tell me," I said. He blinked, thrown off. He had obviously been expecting me to stay silent for much, much longer. The debt was killing me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even think. And Chloe kept telling me it was the only way, that it was a simple move. She got into my head, Emilia. I know it's a pathetic excuse, but she was pushing the whole time. She found the buyer, she drew up the sale agreement, everything. "And the contract?" I asked. He looked at me, his face a perfect mask of rehearsed sincerity. "I signed it. Yes, I did that. But I never filed it. I swear I couldn't. The real deed is safe in the office vault. Every day I thought about it and I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy your family's history like that." His voice cracked perfectly on the last few words. "The DA needs to know this. It needs to be in your statement. I had a terrible idea, and I let it get completely out of hand, but I never actually sold my wife's family's historic building." He looked directly at me when he said it, his eyes glistening with tears. He was holding back with the skill of a professional conman. I reached into my portfolio. I pulled out the city registrar's filing, already tabbed to the correct page. I placed it on the table between us. Then I slid it across the polished oaks so it was facing him. "Page 4, I said. "Exhibit C." He glanced down. His lawyer, Peterson, leaned in to look. The line read, "Deed transfer officially recorded. Wire transfers confirm the buyer's funds cleared via an offshore bank. The transaction date was over 30 days ago. Bank's statements confirm the payment was deposited into a shell company registered in your name." The silence in the room was so heavy you could feel it. 30 days, I repeated. "A whole month ago. The bank records show you were moving the money around the very night before I confronted you." I watched his expression as the facts landed. I watched those perfectly rehearsed tears finally spill, not from remorse, but from the pure shock of being cornered. "You just swore you couldn't do it." I pulled the report back and closed the folder. "You didn't even hesitate, Julian. You did it a month ago, for my grandfather's favorite building, every single day. That's not..." He couldn't even put a sentence together. "That report is wrong, it's a fake. That report is from the Cook County Registrar and the methods are admissible in any court," my brother David said from beside me, his voice calm and firm, with an authority that didn't need to be loud. "The chain of title is unbreakable. It will survive any challenge you can possibly imagine." Julian's lawyer was already scribbling furiously on his notepad, his pen scratching like a man trying to draw a new map after his entire world had been vaporized. Julian was just broken. His entire story was based on one lie, that he never filed the sale and I had just destroyed it with a single piece of paper. From her chair by the wall, his mother Catherine made a small, sharp sound. A little gasp, like a guitar string snapping under too much tension. At some point, Chloe had laid a hand on Julian's arm, a gesture of quiet support. Now I watched her retract it, very deliberately. No sudden movements. She just drew her hand back, placed it in her lap, and stared at the marble floor. Julian saw it. I watched his composure crack as he registered what it signified. I stood up. I slid the auditor's report back into my briefcase, snapped it shut, and pushed my chair in. I looked at Julian one last time. "I suspect the district attorney is going to be fascinated by this paper trail," I said. Then I walked out and didn't turn around. A sharp wind howled in from the lake the morning the trial started. It wasn't a dramatic storm, just that soul-crushing Chicago gray that turns the whole world to steel. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment before going in, not for some cinematic pause, but to feel the cold air bite my cheeks. I wanted to walk into that room by choice, not be swept in by the current of events. I wore a simple charcoal gray dress I'd owned forever, professional and understated. My hair was tied back. I wore no jewelry at all. The faint line on my finger where my wedding ring used to be had finally vanished a few weeks ago. Now, the blank space just felt like power. I didn't need his symbols to define me. The courtroom was a circus. The case had every element the media loves. Old Chicago family, a stunning betrayal, a pregnant wife, and a scheme to have her declared incompetent. 4 news vans were already idling outside. I walked past them without breaking my stride, and my brother David, who was right at my shoulder, has a look that tells reporters to think very carefully about getting in his way. We took our seats in the front row, directly behind the prosecution team. David gave my hand a firm squeeze under the table.
That's all I needed.
I sat beside our lawyer, put my hands on the table, and stared straight ahead. They brought Julian in 5 minutes later. He was allowed to wear a suit for the trial. Someone had provided an expensive navy one that fit perfectly, but he'd lost so much weight it sagged at the shoulders. He looked superficially like the man I'd married. He had the same posture, that calculated confidence, but his eyes were wrong, so wrong I could see it from across the room. They were hollow, the unique emptiness of a man who has played his final hand and is just waiting for the dealer to collect the cards. The assistant DA, a razor-sharp woman named Chen, stood to read the charges. Grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and abuse of a vulnerable person, one for me and one for our unborn son. Each charge landed in the silent courtroom like a physical blow. I felt every single one. The sheer, methodical cruelty of what he'd planned for the woman carrying his child. Julian's defense attorney did his best. He tried to create a narrative of a man buckling under immense financial pressure, a momentary, tragic lapse in judgment. He told a story of a star architect facing ruin who made one awful mistake. He was a good lawyer with an impossible argument, and the jury gave him that blank, polite look of people just waiting for the inevitable. ADA. Chen tore his entire defense to shreds during cross-examination with just a few pointed questions. She proved the scheme unfolded over 6 months and involved 3 different shell corporations, bribing a county clerk, forging my signature on legal documents, and a plan to liquidate all my family's assets. Does that, she asked the jury in her closing, sound like a man who just made a bad choice under pressure? Or does it sound like the cold, patient work of a predator who knew exactly what he was doing all along? The defense attorney had no answer. He just sat down. Chloe was the last witness the prosecution called. She had accepted a plea bargain in exchange for her full testimony, and she was dressed for the part. A plain black dress, no makeup, the very picture of regret. She sat in the witness box and answered every question in a quiet, firm voice that held no emotion. Miss Novak, the prosecutor asked, in your own words, what was the ultimate goal of this plan as Julian explained it to you? Chloe looked right at the jury, not at Julian. She said, he told me that once Amelia was declared incompetent, his power of attorney would give him full control over her family trust. He said we would sell everything and move the firm to Dubai. She paused. He said it like he was ordering a coffee. A quiet shockwave moved through the courtroom. The judge tapped his gavel. In the row behind me, I heard my brother David let out a long, ragged breath. I didn't look at Julian while Chloe spoke. I just watched the faces of the jury as they took it all in. I saw their faces shift from confusion to realization, and finally to a grim, solid understanding. And my mind flashed back to myself, 5 years earlier at a charity dinner. thinking any man who could talk with such vision about building a city must be a good man. The jury left to deliberate at 10:45 in the morning and returned at 1:30. The foreman, a quiet man in his 50s, read the verdict with zero emotion, like he was announcing train times. Guilty on all 6 counts. The judge scheduled the sentencing hearing for the next week. The district attorney insisted he was a flight risk with access to hidden offshore funds, and the judge didn't disagree. The sentence came down that afternoon, feeling like the final chapter of a book I already knew the ending to. Julian Croft was given 25 years in federal prison, no chance of parole, and was ordered to pay back $50 million. His partner Chloe got 7 years. The county clerk who took the bribes was disbarred and got 2. Our half-built penthouse on Lakeshore Drive was now government property. Croft architecture was handed to a bankruptcy court to be sold for parts. When the judge announced 25 years, Julian made a noise. It was tiny, almost silent, a choked-off sound that contained the total demolition of every single thing he had ever designed, built, and lied to protect. He never looked at me once. He looked past me, to the back of the courtroom where his father was sitting, and the expression on his face is something I will never try to put into words. Some things are just beyond language. He looked like a man who finally truly saw the damage he had caused and knew none of it could ever be undone. Mr. Croft sat in the last row, staring at his own hands. He didn't flinch when the sentence was read. He never even looked up. A bailiff walked across the room and snapped handcuffs around Julian's wrists. The click of the steel was shockingly loud in the sudden, heavy silence. They walked him out through a side door. He walked less than 5 feet from my chair, so close I could have tripped him. He stared at the floor, his movements robotic, and then, for just a second, his stride broke. It was a single, tiny hesitation, a flaw so small only someone who knew his rhythm by heart would ever catch it. Then he was through the heavy doors and gone. I just sat there as the courtroom noise slowly swelled back up, the lawyers and onlookers starting to murmur again. I was saying goodbye, but not to Ethan. I'd already done that the night I discovered the hidden accounts on his laptop and my entire life imploded. No, I was saying goodbye to the woman I used to be, the one who thought she needed his world to be whole. The woman who thought her value was measured in corporate mergers and charity balls and never bothered to check the foundations of her own life. That woman was gone for good. I knew it like a project is truly finished. Not with some big party, but with that quiet calm of seeing the final result for exactly what it is. I stood, grabbed my purse, and walked toward the exit. My brother Liam and our mentor David were waiting on the steps, braced against the sharp Chicago wind. David had his collar turned up, hands shoved deep in his pockets. The moment he saw me, he crossed the distance and pulled me into a hug so fierce I felt a year of tension just released from my spine. He didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Liam just watched us, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. When David finally let go, he held my face in his hands. He just looked at me for a second, the same way he did when I was a kid with a scraped knee or a broken heart. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's finally over." I repeated. The wind howled around us, cold and uncaring, the way only Chicago wind can be. I tilted my face up, letting the crisp, real air sting my cheeks. Then the 3 of us walked down the steps together. A week after the verdict, I drove to the police evidence depot on Michigan Avenue. No husband, no brother, no lawyers. Just me, a ticking parking meter, and a grim afternoon that smelled like diesel fumes and the threat of snow coming off the lake. The desk officer was young, with exhausted eyes. He located the evidence bag in under 5 minutes and slid it across the counter. I signed the release form, tore the plastic seal, and emptied the contents into my hand. A vintage gold watch dropped into my palm, and a forgotten part of me recognized its weight, the way a person freezing knows the memory of fire. The gold was smooth at the edges, worn down from decades of being on someone else's wrist. The inscription on the back was just as I remembered. There were 2 tiny scratches near the clasped, thin, frantic lines where Ethan must have tried to pry it open. I traced them with my thumb. "You all right, ma'am?" the young cop asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "I am," I said, and for the first time in a very long time, it was the absolute truth. I was turning to go when the officer called out, "Oh, wait, a letter came for you this morning from a federal processing center." He listed this as the contact address. "You want it?" He held out a simple white envelope. My name was on the front, written in his familiar hand, the precise way he always formed the C in Chloe. I took it from him. I found an empty bench nearby, sat down, and tore it open. The letter was 2 pages long, written on cheap, thin paper. His handwriting seemed smaller than I remembered, pinched and tight, like he was running out of space. It started with my name, Chloe. I'm not sure why I'm writing this. I assume you'll just throw it away. But I had to say things that I couldn't say in that courtroom, not with all those people watching. I know you think every word I speak is an act. Maybe you're right. But I want to try just this once to tell you the real story. When we met, I had no clue about your family's legacy in this city. I know how that must sound, but it's the honest truth. All I knew was that you were a genius. The way you could look at an empty piece of land and see a skyscraper, it felt like actual magic. I fell in love with your brain, Chloe, long before I ever learned about the inheritance. But then, somewhere along the way, knowing about it all, it shattered something inside me. Not out of greed, but because standing next to you made me see how insignificant my own life was. I felt like a cheap knockoff next to you, Chloe. A very good fake, but still a fake. And I couldn't stand that feeling anymore. So I gave up trying to be worthy of you, and I just started taking. I know that's no excuse. I know our daughter Lily is going to grow up knowing what her father became. That's a weight I'll carry forever. It's the one sentence I've truly earned, and I absolutely deserve it. But I needed to tell you that I really did love you. Whatever that love turned into, whatever I twisted it into to excuse my own crimes, it began as something true. Please believe that. I folded the letter. I held it in my hand. He was at it again. Even from inside its prison, Ethan Vance was trying to rebuild a history that never existed. Not I lied to you, but I was in pain. Not I committed fraud. But your success overwhelmed me. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation, just like everything else he ever built. It had just enough honesty mixed in to make the lies feel real, unless you knew exactly where the cracks were. And I knew. I walked over to the garbage can by the door and I dropped the letter inside. I didn't even pause. I dropped it like you'd drop a tool when the job is done. Then I walked back out into the wind and fastened the old gold watch around my wrist. The metal felt cold for a moment, and then slowly it began to warm against my skin. I met my sister-in-law, Jenna, at the Bayside Park as we'd arranged. She was watching Mia for me while I ran a few errands. This late in the season, the park was nearly deserted, just a couple of joggers and an old man feeding the seagulls. Mia spotted me from across the lawn and her face just lit up with that pure, unfiltered joy that only little kids have. She came charging across the grass like a tiny torpedo and crashed into my legs for a hug, her cold nose pressing against my jeans. "Mommy, we saw a dolphin," she yelled, her voice muffled by my coat. It jumped right out of the water. Jenna laughed as she walked over. "I think that was just a big wave, sweetie." "No," Mia said, with the total certainty of a 4-year-old. "It was a dolphin, a real one." She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the low stone wall at the water's edge. "Come on, maybe he'll come back for us." "Dolphins don't usually take requests, Mia," Jenna said, leaning against the wall beside me. "This one might," she insisted, her eyes glued to the horizon. We stood there for a while, the three of us, as Mia made little clicking noises at the bay, which failed to summon the dolphin but seemed to get the attention of the seagull guy. After a minute, Mia announced that the dolphin had probably gone home to get a snack and that we should do the same. And could we get a warm pretzel, but the kind with the giant salt crystals on it? The ones with the little salt just aren't good enough. The little salt is a disgrace to all pretzels, Jenna added with a straight face. Mia nodded seriously. Exactly. She took my hand and Jenna's and marched us toward the car, as if she'd just successfully brokered world peace. I looked at her small warm hand in mine, so sure that the person holding it would always be there to protect her. Back at the house, I went to my office and took an old photo album from the bookshelf. The first year we were married. I sat with it on my lap in the quiet of the afternoon. The leather was worn soft from being opened and closed so many times. I flipped to a random page and traced the shape of his smile. The photo paper was cool beneath my finger. All the little seeds of doubt he planted over the years were still there. But I wasn't going to destroy the pictures. I learned something vital from that time. The cracks in the foundation aren't just the damage. They're the evidence. They tell the story of what was strong enough to survive. The little charm on Mia's necklace glowed with a soft green light, a single pulse every 30 seconds. I had checked the network that morning, and it was pinging our private server perfectly encrypted and secure, just as I designed it. A quiet, constant signal. My father built the first prototype after my older brother disappeared from a mall when they were children. Dad spent his life preparing for the worst-case scenario, and I built a career on it. Titan security, the encrypted networks, the private protection details, it all came from that one terrible day. I built fortresses for other people. I just never imagined I would need one for my own child. Mama. Mia bounced into the room carrying 2 mugs, her face bright from the cold and flushed with the triumph of having secured extra marshmallow hot chocolate. I got you the cinnamon one, she said, the absolute best kind. I told her with a smile. Obviously, she said, climbing onto the couch beside me. She snuggled into my side with that complete trusting weight of a child who knows they are safe and loved and right where they belong. I held the warm mug and just breathed. For a moment, my daughter tucked against me, the city lights beginning to glitter outside. And I finally understood what I'd been feeling for weeks. Real security is not something you get from someone else. Love isn't about the flashy galas or the penthouse apartments. It's something you build yourself. One choice after another, one boundary at a time, the quiet, daily work of protecting your own heart. A siren wailed somewhere over the Chicago skyline. The radiators hissed. I rested a hand on my growing belly, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Now, looking back, I wish someone had told me this. Betrayal doesn't knock. It doesn't send a warning. It just shows up on your doorstep in a little blue box from a jewelry store, holding a bracelet meant for your husband's young protégé. Don't be like me. Don't wait for the receipt to finally trust your gut. That little voice in your head that's been questioning all the late nights at the architecture, firm, and the vague client trips. That voice is never wrong. I'm not the hero of this story. This whole disaster taught me the only person I could truly count on was myself. And listen, the revenge was sweet. Exposing his secrets and forcing the sale of his prized developments felt pretty good. But the real victory? That was my daughter S, little hand in mine on a cold afternoon, and the solid, unshakable knowledge that I had finally built a life that was completely and totally my own. I believe certain people enter our lives to force us to become who we were always meant to be. Our closest friends, a good therapist, and sometimes the stronger version of ourselves we have to fight to become. Stories of betrayal and family drama often end the same way with the moment someone decides they refuse to stay broken. At least that's my take. Every story about getting justice begins with the choice to stop being a victim. So put yourself first. If this story meant something to you, please think about sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below and subscribe for more stories about rediscovering your own strength. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you for listening. And just a reminder, these stories are dramatized to explore real-life themes for thought and entertainment. If that's not your thing, no problem. Go find something that is. But if you're sticking around, I am so very glad you're here.